Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day to all of you. Thanks for joining me as always. This is Everything Pats, a New England Patriots podcast. If you're watching for the first time, I apologize. If you're not watching for the first time, I apologize because as you see the background, this is a hotel room in Salisbury, Maryland. Not the greatest lighting, not the greatest background, is what it is. You do see Sammy though. She's very, very, very relaxed. She's not worried about the background. She's looking good. Let's jump right into it. I'm recording this on Wednesday morning. If there's breaking news, I'll have to record something later on at some point because I'm going to be on the road for the next few hours. So I want to get this out there to all of you. So hopefully you can enjoy the content from a hotel room in Salisbury, Maryland. All right, Patriots. They made a signing as I was on the road, driving from Foxborough down here to Maryland with the ultimate goal being Virginia Beach for a little bit of vacay this weekend, which reminds me, no podcast on Friday. Patriots signed Garrett Bradbury, former Vikings center, to a 2-year deal worth up to $12 million, $3.8 million guaranteed. This is not a surprise. A lot of people talked about Bradbury being a possible fit as soon as the Vikings decided to move on from Bradbury. I don't think the timing was coincidental. The same day that the Vikings said they were going to release Bradbury is the same day, or at least try to trade him, was the same day that the Patriots released David Andrews. So I don't think that's coincidental. Now, Mark Daniels of Mass Live, he says the Patriots see Bradbury as an upgrade. At least they added a veteran offensive lineman, right? It's something they absolutely needed to do. I think they need to add more veteran offensive linemen to this offensive line, as we discussed on Monday. I don't think they have enough right now. Bradbury is a former first-round pick, 18th overall by the Vikings back in 2019. He has started every game since the day he was drafted, aside from the games that he missed via injury. Last year, he played all 17, started all 17. Before that, in 2023, I believe he started 14 games. So he has been the starting center for the Vikings since he was drafted in the first round back in 2019. What are Garrett Bradbury's traits? Who is he as a center? What's he look like? How big is he? What's he do best? What's he not do so well? Well, he is very athletic. Evan Lazar had the numbers last night. We look at the relative athletic score, which is a metric used to figure out how athletic a positional player is compared to the same positional players that have gone through the combine, have gone through the testing in prior years. And when you look at Bradbury, Bradbury had a relative athletic score of 9.96. That is out of a possible 10, which made him the 11th most athletic center that had ever tested. So this guy is an unbelievable athlete for the position. He's a former tight end that moved to center, makes a lot of sense. There's a highlight out there from last season, I believe, when Sam Darnold threw a football and it was deflected. It got popped up and Bradbury actually made the catch, almost like a shoestring catch, and ran 15 to 20 yards for a chunk play for the Vikings. So he's a very, very athletic guy. And because he was a former tight end, he's also incredibly intelligent. He has played in multiple schemes. He understands multiple schemes. Very, very smart guy. Football IQ should help him with the Josh McDaniels offense. So those are a couple of things that you look at as far as Bradbury that make him unique. His athleticism and his high football IQ, which is critical for a center. So those two things, very good. He is undersized. He's one of the smaller centers in the NFL. He's 6'3", 300 pounds. He's not as big as some other dudes at that position in the league. So he's undersized, super athletic, super smart. That's your general framework of Garrett Bradbury when you look at him and what you should anticipate. Again, the last 2 seasons, he has started 31 of a possible 34 games for the Vikings. He's a really good run blocker, a terrific run blocker. We'll get to that in a minute. But before I get to that, I'm going to remind you, help us out as I'm sitting here in Salisbury, Maryland in a hotel. Help us out, build this community. Continue to help us build this community by doing a couple of things. Doesn't cost you any money. Doesn't really cost you much time at all. Don't forget to click that like button on YouTube. Click that thumbs up if you're watching right now. If you're listening on Spotify, you can also click the Spotify follow button. You can rate and review at Spotify. And don't forget to throw comments in. I know we're not live. I'm recording this on Wednesday morning. But when you throw the comments in, that still helps us with the algorithm. So don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, don't forget to subscribe. We're inching towards 6,300 subscribers. The goal is 6,500 by round 1 of the NFL draft. We're about 5 weeks away or so. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment as you watch, especially if you enjoy the content. If you hate the content and you hate watch or hate listen, you can still help us out. We'll pump out more episodes for you to hate. Let's get to Garrett Bradbury and the fact that he's a very good run-blocking center. Mark Daniels wrote this at Mass Live. Pro Football Focus graded Bradbury as one of the best run-blocking centers with a 70.7 grade. That ranked him 14th in the NFL. So he's just about middle of the pack last year in run blocking, but he's known as a really good run blocker. If you were wondering, David Andrews last year before his injury, his run blocking grade was 60.1. which was 37th in the NFL last year. So Bradbury is a much, much better run blocker than David Andrews. The biggest issue with Bradbury, and I'm sure some of you have heard this already, we'll dive into the details of it, but the biggest issue with Bradbury has to do with his pass protection. Really good run blocker, not so much pass protection. Doug Kye, Andrew Callahan at the Boston Herald wrote that Bradbury allowed a career-high 38 pressures last season, according to Pro Football Focus. He gave up 38 pressures last year. That is a ton. 21 pressures, according to Chad Graff of The Athletic, in his final 2 games. So Bradbury gave up 38 pressures last year. He gave up 21 pressures over his final 2 weeks. So I don't know if you look at the first 14, 15 games, what the pressure numbers look like. Obviously, if he gave up 38 pressures, I don't know if that's including the playoff game. The last 2 weeks that Chad Graff writes about, I'd imagine includes the playoff game. The Vikings offensive line had a wretched time against that LA Rams defensive front in the playoff game. So I don't know how many pressures Bradbury gave up in the first 14, 15 weeks. He might not have been as bad through the first 2 or 3 months of the season as he was over the final month of the season. So it's an interesting split between those numbers, but no matter what, no matter how you slice it, he wasn't good in pass protection. And this has been a problem. This has been a problem really throughout his career. It's been the big question about him. Again, super athletic, really good run blocker, highly intelligent, reportedly a good guy, good in the locker room, good for the culture, quote unquote. But the pass protection has been the biggest issue. Again, back to Mark Daniels, if you're wondering, Bradbury's pass protection grade was a 48.2, which put him 55th in the NFL. 55th. Now, Andrews wasn't great. Andrews had a pass protection grade of 60, which made him 45th in the league. So Bradbury last year was worse in pass protection than Andrews, but he was much better in run blocking than Andrews. He's also younger. He's 29 years old. So he's younger, less snaps. You get the point. Mike Giardi tweeted this just to really put a highlight on the pass protection issue. Nate Tice, who does a great job, he was, I think, at Bleacher Report. He might have moved recently. Nate Tice actually gave us these numbers, and Giardi tweeted them out. Bradbury gave up the highest one-on-one pressure rate of all centers in the league, a whopping 12.7%. So again, pass protection's an issue. One-on-one blocking and pass pro is an issue, and it's because he's undersized and his arms aren't long. Where have we heard that? His arms are under 32 inches long. So he's got shorter arms. He's not a really big dude. So he has some issue with that pressure one-on-one, and when he can't really try to battle double teams given the undersized issue and the arm length. So Jordan Reed of ESPN tweeted out that he was surprised Minnesota couldn't get at least a pick swap for Bradbury. He's a fine run blocker in outside zone heavy schemes, which we'll get to in a minute, but he struggles to anchor in pass protection. So again, it's about the anchor. You'll remember some of these questions when Cole Strange was drafted. A lot of people, including my guy Greg Bedard, had a big issue with the idea of Cole Strange being a little bit light in the tuk-tuk. He doesn't have a big ass. He's not a big guy with big legs, right? And at guard, that can be an issue in pass protection because you can't really anchor against these bigger pass rush dudes up front. Well, Bradbury has somewhat of a similar issue. He doesn't have a strong anchor because he's undersized, and he doesn't have the arm length which is less of an issue when you're a center because you're dealing with interior defensive linemen. You don't have guys rushing off the edge. You don't have them going off the 9 wide, as they call it, which is when a defensive end is just spread almost all the way to the sideline. So it's a little bit less of an issue, and that's why guys who are under 33 inches are seen as guards, because you can survive on the interior with shorter arms than if you're trying to be a tackle. But the pass protection issue is an issue, and I would imagine that Bradbury is going to need some help. Now, I would say, when you look at last year specifically, one of the questions that we have to ask is how much was Bradbury impacted by the rest of the Vikings offensive line? They did not have a very good offensive line. They traded for Cam Robinson in the middle of the season. He was banged up. He wasn't used to the scheme. He wasn't very good, especially the last 2 weeks, much like Bradbury. And in the playoff game, it was somewhat of a disaster, if not a straight-up disaster. So the Minnesota Vikings offensive line had problems across the board. Was it a coaching issue? Was it a lack of talent issue? Were some guys trying to help other guys a little bit too much and giving up too much on their own end? Because when you look at Bradbury himself, right guard was a massive problem for the Vikings last year. They went out and they signed a guard in this offseason to help them address that problem. His name escapes me. He's from the Colts. I should remember. I do not. But they signed Will Freeze. They signed Will Freeze at guard to try to address that right guard issue. And obviously they brought in Kelly from the Colts, who is going to replace Bradbury. So they wanted to address those two spots, but right guard wasn't very good either, to the point where Ed Ingram, who was their starting right guard last year, was benched about halfway through the season. They threw in Dalton Risner, who has some history with Mike Vrabel from his time in Tennessee. But Risner was the backup. He got thrown in about halfway through the year because Ingram was bad. Ingram's now gone. So they just had a lot of problems on that offensive line in Minnesota last year, and Bradbury was part of the problem. Again, how much was he impacted by the coaching? How much was he impacted by the rest of the offensive line? That's a question. Not to say he's not going to give up pressure, because he's given up pressure his entire career. It's been an issue his entire career. But as bad as it was last year, how much was it all on him? How much was it possibly on some other guys? Another part, again, we stuck a pin in the zone scheme. Now, this is what's interesting. Bradbury, again, super athletic, gets to the second level quickly. And when you are smaller and athletic as an offensive lineman, you usually fit better in that outside zone scheme. We know the Patriots, especially with Josh McDaniels, they haven't run the outside zone scheme. They haven't run that. They run a lot of duo, as they call it, which is, double blocks on guys, getting downhill. So does this mean they're going to run more outside zone with McDaniels this year? Remember, McDaniels, he traveled around the country. He went to different college programs, different NFL programs, wanted to tweak some of his offense, change some of the offense. Will we see more zone run than we thought we would? The Bradbury signing at least opens up that possibility, because he is better in that zone run scheme than he would be in the downhill duo, again, because of his size. So this could be an interesting fit. As we know, Ramondre Stevenson last year wasn't as good as he has been in the past with that zone run scheme. So we got to see how these pieces fit. How much zone run will they actually deploy? We'll have to wait and see. Mike Reese added that Bradbury is good in the gun, so that's nice to know. We know last year the Patriots had some issues with shotgun snaps. That should not be a problem with Bradbury. And the big picture, really, if you just want to break it down to its simplest form, the Patriots' offensive line today is much better than it was yesterday. And when you look at from center to right tackle, the offensive line is better, if not much better, than it was last year. I mean, when you look at Bradbury versus Ben Brown, Bradbury's an upgrade. Micah Wenu, fully focused on right guard. He should be better earlier this season in 2025 than he was in early to about mid-2024, because he was still shuffling between right tackle, right guard. Wenu fully focused at right guard is a very good thing. And then you've got Morgan Moses at right tackle, which is an upgrade, obviously, over Demontre Jacobs. He's an upgrade over Caden Wallace. So from center to right tackle, your offensive line is better in 2025 than it was in 2024. That is solid. That is solid. That's what this team needed. Now, of course, left tackle is still the biggest issue. Update on that, Burt Breer last night on NBC Sports Boston's early edition said that Jedrick Wills has a knee condition, and apparently the knee condition is enough to take him off of certain teams' boards in free agency. So maybe that's why Jedrick Wills has not been signed yet. Maybe that's why there's not much interest in him from the Patriots, apparently. To go along with that knee, he also has some character questions. He talked about making business decisions last year by sitting out a game. I'm sure that did not rub some people in the league that well. So when you look at Jedrick Wills, the knee condition is a problem I did not know about. I knew he was banged up. I knew he had some injuries, but the way that Burt said it last night sounds like it's a pretty significant issue to the point where some teams in the league don't even want to touch the guy because they don't think he's medically good enough. So that adds a little bit of background on him. Cam Robinson, as I record this at 11:20 on Wednesday morning, is still available, and I still think the Patriots should bring Cam Robinson in. I would not pay him, $15 million guaranteed. If you get a 2-year deal, maybe I inch towards $15 million, but I would look at an incentive-laden contract. I'd be willing to guarantee him $10 million. Maybe that's a little high for the 1-year deal. Maybe I guarantee him $7-8 million, add, $4 to $5 million in incentives. But I'd be looking at Cam Robinson, even with the character issues, even if he wasn't as good last year as he had been in prior years. I'd bring him in, let him compete against Vidarian Lowe. He brings more experience to the table at left tackle, and it makes you less desperate come draft time because you could live with the idea of Cam Robinson competing with Vidarian Lowe. You could live with the idea of left guard, even though I'd go after Tevin Jenkins, I'd still go after him. You could live with the idea of a competition between Sidy Sow, Cole Strange, and Layden Robinson, and then you have center to right tackle figured out. So if they add Cam Robinson, if they could make that addition, then I feel pretty good about this offensive line going into the draft. I feel much better about it than I did last week when they had holes at center, left guard, and left tackle. If they address left tackle with Cam Robinson, they've addressed center with Garrett Bradbury, I could live with the trio of some kind of competition at left guard between the three guys I mentioned. All right, let's move on. I remind you, no pod on Friday. I'll be on vacation down at Virginia Beach drinking a lot of beer, watching the NCAA tournament with Kelly. So no pod on Friday. If huge news breaks, I'll do a podcast at some point. I don't know when, but I will throw it out there to the ether at some point if big breaking news happens. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to comment. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to help us. The likes, the comments help us with the algorithm on YouTube. And if you're listening on Spotify or watching on Spotify, you can follow us. You can rate and review. And, of course, our friends at Apple Pods. I do not forget about you either. All right, let's wrap this up with a Sports Illustrated idea of a trade that jumped out at me. So SI came up with this trade, and I want to know how you feel about it. Throw it in the comments. Let me know your reaction to this trade, this idea, this hypothetical. The Patriots would trade the 4th pick in the draft to San Francisco for Brandon Ayuk, swap from 4 to 11, so they'd be drafting 11th in the first round, and they would also pick up the 43rd pick in the draft, which is San Francisco's 2nd round pick. How do you feel about that trade? You'd be trading number 4 for the swap of 11, right? 4 to 11. I don't say you trade 4 for 11 because you're swapping picks. So you go from 4 down to 11 to pick up Brandon Ayuk and the 43rd pick in the 2nd round. Are you yes, thumbs up, or you no on that? Yes or no on that idea? Couple caveats. I'm not trading number 4 unless it's for a generational player. If Micah Parsons is available and the Cowboys are willing to trade Micah Parsons, I'd be willing to give up the 4th pick in the draft for Micah Parsons. He's in his mid-20s. He is arguably the best defensive player in all of football. Yes, you have to give him a contract that's going to be astronomical, but I would still make that deal. Generational player, I'd make that deal. I don't think there are guys available that are generational right now, but I would trade the 4th pick if you're telling me somebody that I'm bringing back is a generational talent. That word gets thrown around a lot, but I mean generational. Top of the top. I'd also say I'm not trading the 4th pick if I'm unsure whether or not Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter will be there at 4. So if somebody calls me for the 4th pick, my first question is it for a generational player? If it is, I deal the pick. If somebody called me for the 4th pick, and if it was not for a generational player, I wouldn't trade the pick until draft night. I'd wait to see if one of Hunter or Carter fall to me at 4, because I would much rather draft Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter than any other player in this draft from round 1 through round 7. So if it's for a generational guy, I'd be willing to give up the opportunity, the chance to draft one of Hunter or Carter. If it's not for a generational guy, I'm holding on to that pick until draft night, just in case one of those 2 cats fall to me at 4. Okay? With that said, here's the hypothetical situation. If it's draft night, no generational player is available to me, right? There's not a single generational guy that's available to me via trade with the 4th pick. Hunter, Carter, they get drafted in the top 3 picks. So I'm sitting there at 4, and I don't have a shot at Hunter. I don't have a shot at Carter. I don't have a shot at a generational player. I would absolutely 100% unequivocally make that trade that SI brings up. And I see some people fighting back. I don't know why you would fight back on that. I would not even think twice about pulling the trigger on that trade. If there's no Hunter, if there's no Carter, if there's no generational option via trade, I would absolutely trade the 4th pick, and I would go back down to 11, and I would pick up Brandon Ayuk, and I would pick up the 43rd pick. At the 11th pick, I could always move back up into the top 10, or I can stick and pick at 11. You have guys like Calvin Banks. You have guys like Tyler Warren possibly there, Josh Simmons from Ohio State. You know, you've got 2 or 3 young edges on the defensive side in that range. So I'm still getting a very good football player at 11. I'm landing Ayuk, who is now my wide receiver 1 when he comes back from injury. And hopefully he'd be my wide receiver 1 for the next 3 or 4 years. If I miss out on Travis Hunter, now I can plug Ayuk in there at the beginning of October. Burt Breer last night said maybe even the summertime Ayuk would be back. I don't know about that. Kendrick Bourne blew his ACL out, and he was out from October to October. Ayuk blew his ACL out and MCL out last October. I'm guessing he'll be out until October. If he's back sooner, great news. But Ayuk would be my number 1 receiver for the next 3 or 4 years. So I'm still adding. I mean, imagine this offense, right? Imagine this offense if you drafted Josh Simmons at 11 and he's your left tackle, and then you have Ayuk as your number 1 receiver end of September, early October. And then with that deal, you also have the 43rd pick in the draft. So now you have number 38 and number 43, and there's a lot of things that you can do. You can stick and pick at 38. You can stick and pick at 43. You can try to move up from 38 into the first round, and now you're less worried about moving that 38 pick and maybe a 3rd round pick to move into the first round, because if you do that, you still have 43. So, for example, let's just throw this out there. Let's say you made that trade with San Francisco. You went from 4 to 11. At 11, you drafted Tyler Warren from Penn State, excellent tight end. That's your pick at 11. Now, with the 38th pick, let's say you trade number 38 and number 77, the 3rd round pick that you got from the Judon trade. You trade 38 and 77 to move up into the mid-20s, and you draft a tackle, Ariante Ursary, or maybe Josh Simmons falls to the mid-20s. Maybe you draft Josh Connolly from Oregon. So now you've got Ayuk, Tyler Warren, young left tackle, and you still have the 43rd pick in the 2nd round, and you still have your own 3rd round pick. That trade to me would be a no-brainer. Honestly, if you didn't have a chance at Hunter, you didn't have a chance at Carter, and you didn't have a chance at a generational player, that kind of trade to me is the perfect trade. You drop down 7-8 spots from 4 to 11, but you still get a really good young player at a position of need in the future, somebody who can help your offense. You have the option to either draft a tackle in the early 2nd round. You can draft a tackle at 11 if you want. You can move up into the late 1st round to draft a tackle. There's a lot of different things that you can do. if you made a trade like that one that was proposed by SI. And you got Ayuk. Easily, I would do that. Easily. Again, if I couldn't get a generational guy, if I couldn't get Carter, if I couldn't get Hunter. All right, that'll do it for today's podcast. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to comment. Don't forget to subscribe. As always, the comments and the likes help us with that YouTube algorithm. Don't forget to rate and review at Spotify, Apple Pods, and on Spotify. Don't forget to follow us as we continue to build Everything Pats, a New England Patriots podcast. If I do not do a breaking news podcast at some point over the next few days, everybody enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the NCAA tournament. If you're into it, I love it. I certainly will. But until next time, it's Everything Pats with Nick Cattles.